Hey everyone, and welcome to another screencast. This one will be safety on the job and masonry industry. So by the end of this chapter, some things that you'll be able to know will be the proper dress and clothing you should wear while on the job, some PPE that you need on the job, tool and equipment safety areas that you'll encounter on the job, and proper procedures if you or another masonry worker get injured while working. So nothing should be more important to anyone, not just masons, right? Anyone on the job. Personal safety and the prevention of accidents on the job. Housekeeping is a huge issue, and keeping everything around you clean, your tools clean, top priority. Many accidents could be avoided if common sense was practiced and shortcuts were not taken. This I emphasize in the lab all the time. With time comes speed, don't worry about rushing. Some of you are familiar with OSHA, and we'll go into more detail on that in another screencast. You must always have a safety attitude at all time when you're at work, not just for you, but for other people. If someone else is careless, they have a high chance of injuring you as well. So let's go over some of the important dresses that you should have. Clothing and shoes. Depending where you're working, you may or may not need steel toe safety shoes. Protective headgear. You can see this guy here has a hard hat on while he's using a wet saw to cut brick. Eye protection. You always need eye protection, not only if you're working with something like a power tool, but if someone else is as well. Hearing protection. We cover this in the general safety presentation that you guys should have completed already. Work gloves, she also has here. And then your hair. If you have long hair, tie it back, keep it out of the way. If you have a long beard, make sure it's tied up, tucked in. Always stack your material safety. Now, again, this is for any trade. This isn't just for masonry. Instead of having a pile of bricks that they're not stacked, you could see the pattern that they use here is these run that direction, and then these run this direction. They crisscross them. And the likelihood of that being able to fall over on its own is a lot smaller than if they were all running in the same direction. If materials stack too high, even this section that you have here, even though it's stacked right, with one running in this direction and then the other in this direction, if you keep on going up with the height, it's still going to fall. These are old. I wouldn't worry about that. You're not going to see any of those, and if you do, you probably shouldn't be there. Depending on how high up you are, again, that's covered in another OSHA module. You don't need to know that right now. But you should have lifelines and safety belts. These are required, and we do have them in the lab for when you're working on scaffolding. So some tools, especially striking tools, they tend to get a mushroomed head. And when you see that, it needs to get trimmed or ground off. And the reason that's bad is if you have a chisel and it has a mushroomed head, it looks kind of like this, and that's just from striking it, but all these little pieces crack. And one day if you strike it, this one can fly off. They can hit you in the head, they can hit you in the eye if you don't have safety glasses on. And it's just not worth it's not worth the risk. Your electrical equipment, so something to keep in mind when you guys are pulling plugs apart, always grab by the plug ends. That's why they're there. Never grab it by the cord and pull. Because in this instance, especially, you could see that that plug end is replaced. and eventually you're going to loosen everything on the inside. Ladder safety, we covered some of that in the general safety presentation. The ragged edged mortar pans. Now, what a lot of people don't realize is that they wear over time, and you get a ragged edge developed on your pans just from use. And this will end up cutting you like a razor because the steel wears very thin and it gets really sharp. Removing nails from lumber. This is an important aspect. I know I've told some of you about it, my personal experience with people who don't remove nails from lumber. I ended up having a nail get caught in the palm of my hand when I went to get a piece of wood. I went to throw it, and the nail grabbed the inside of my hand, and the piece of wood stopped. Not good. That could have been prevented by whoever drove the nail if they would have removed it. Always be aware of overhead objects, ones that could fall or ones that you could strike your head on. Protective safety caps. These are really big. These will help keep you from getting cut or getting impaled from rebar on the job. Cut rebar, it's the same thing as the ragged edged mortar pans that will end up cutting you like a razor. Scaffolding safety. You don't have to get too involved with this right now. We have a section just on it, but you can see some of these things. These are common, and we'll go over how to set scaffolding and things to look for in another module. So again, this was covered in our general safety presentation with the correct lifting technique. You can see in this demonstration, this person has the block close to them and they're lifting with their legs. In this one, the block is further away and they're lifting with their back. You might not think much of it if you do it 10, 20 times, but if you work an 8-hour shift and you do it hundreds of times, you're going to feel it at the end of the day. So some hazards with these, very likely if you're not paying attention that you can get your hand caught in there. We don't have a powered mortar mixer in the lab, but just be aware of it. Masonry saw, we have one in the lab. It's a gas powered one. You have to do a safety check off with that. So in this module, I won't go over that in detail. Grinders, we really don't use in the lab, but be aware of it. The grinding wheels, depending on the ones that you're using, if they're an abrasive blade, those can end up blowing up. Well, they blow apart. And when you're using a grinder, a lot of times it'll throw dust and it'll throw small particles at an accelerated rate, which probably sounds familiar. Some other hazards if you're working on the job is welder flash. This is caused by the arc of the welders, and if you're working on a job where you're laying brick or block and there's a steel structure, chances of you getting welder flash are pretty good. Large equipment movement. So although people who are operating heavy machinery should be on a lookout for you, you're just as responsible to be on the lookout for them. Never assume that they see you. So when an injury does occur, if something were to happen on the job or in the lab, report to myself, or if you're on the job, a supervisor immediately. If you don't report the accidents within a specific time limit, so for example, let's say that you were laying block and you pinched your fingers between the block that you're laying and another one that was there. If you come back 2 days later and say to your boss that you need to go to the doctor because you pinched your finger 2 days ago, how do they know that that didn't happen at home? That's going to be their first question. So in order to make sure that you don't have a loss of right or loss of benefits, make sure you report it immediately. On this one, if you get hurt on the job, there is workman's compensation. which is if you get injured, you get paid for the time that you're not working. And if you don't report it immediately and it can't be demonstrated that it happened on the job, your claim may be denied. So some of the ways that you can get contaminated by hazardous materials are in your eyes. So you can have dust. Brick also gets cleaned with a mild acid at times. You don't want that getting in your eyes. Lime, same thing. You don't want it getting in your eyes. Absorption. I just talked slightly about the acid that's used to clean bricks as well as other solution. It can get into your skin and end up causing burns. Inhalation of toxic fumes and dust. So on this one, it depends on types of sealers and who's working around you. There may be toxic fumes, so be aware of that. Dust, you guys should be familiar with that. You have to describe what crystalline silica is and the exposure rates allowed by OSHA. And then obviously the ingestion of something that's toxic. So you have no reason to do this. Usually people are pretty good about not eating things that are toxic, but if you do, be aware of it and what you need to do. So where you can find a lot of this information in lab, we have what's called a safety data sheet. Ours are online. So any material that's in this lab, we have online telling you what risks it poses, what can happen, and everything else. So real quick, falls are among the most common cause of serious work-related injuries. This is one of the big four from OSHA, and we'll be talking more about that in another module. Employers must provide general working conditions that are free from known dangers. Now, while they must provide this, you must also make sure that any dangers that are present get reported immediately, and always look out for your own safety. The worker's responsibilities are to work in a safe and responsible manner, so this means no shortcuts, no horseplay, in conformance with all required safety rules and regulations. So some safety rules and regulations, OSHA is one, and your employer or the general contractor on the job may also have their own rules and regulations in place that need to be followed. If not, there's a chance that you can be removed or fired. That's it for this one, and talk to you guys on the next one.